Hari
of suffering, because from one side, suffering is kind of negative because it shows that we shouldn't suffer. But without suffering, we have no lesson. Because suffering gives us the lesson that something is wrong, and then we can evolve. We can find that there is something that we don't take as it is.
Mm-hmm.
We just want something different.
Yeah.
That's why it causes suffering.
Yeah.
So then the question is, what about suffering? Is it necessary or not?
Mm.
Without suffering, in the comfort zone, nothing much happens.
Mm. Consciousness naturally is totally curious. You don't need suffering in order to explore, to expand. But as long as we are functioning disharmonious, as long as we are creating all kinds of tensions unnecessarily, suffering is inevitable. But that doesn't mean you can say suffering is necessary, so it's good that there is war. That's crazy and viewing. If you live alert, if you live in touch with life, then throughout your whole life you have that curiosity of a baby. Baby is still connected, and look how they are curious, look how they are functioning in bursts. They just are curious about experience. They don't need suffering in order to be like this, it's simply natural. Then we grow up and become reasonable, know the seriousness of life, and we stop our natural curiosity and simply function when the destiny is forcing us through pain. But it need not be like this. If you stop hanging on to all that ideas that I have about myself, I'm like this, I'm like that, if you stop having all that fixed, obsessive ideas how things should be or not, but just learn to be, then that natural curiosity is simply there. You don't need suffering in order to unfold. It happens naturally. You can gain that back. A baby doesn't have a choice, doesn't have to develop the intellect to always argue about every damn little thing in the head. But, yes?
Finish your sentence.
But then when we grow up, we learn, we are being bombarded all the time by the instruction how we should be, how we should not be, what we should think, what we should not think, and we start to function that way and lose that touch to that natural curiosity. And think about it all the time, think about everything, argue about everything, and then we lose that natural curiosity. But if we learn not to do that anymore, it's simply there. It hasn't been extinguished. It simply has no chance to express itself because we are so busy on our mental level, thinking all the time. Yes?
I have a special question about suffering,
Yeah.
which I understand in a psychological way, but not in the way of the soul. So let's say suffering often begins in the childhood. Let's say there are experiences of violence. You suffered from violence of your parents.
Yes.
And it was very bad and you're conscious about that.
Yes.
And then you grow up and you have your relations and you choose the same again, unconsciously.
Yes.
So why choose the soul suffering again and again, even you're aware it's not good? Why does the soul doesn't change the other way so you can really heal it and make a new experience?
Yeah.
What for this I see with so many people again and again.
Generation after generation repeating the same stories over and over.
What for? What is the lesson to learn then?
I mean, when I said suffering is not necessary, I'm not saying suffering is useless. It's a very slow and a very painful way, but still, every being that goes through this painful stuff is accumulating something very precious. At that time, not aware of it, but eventually that same being will start to consciously reap the fruit, having gone through all that. So nothing is in vain. Not a drop of pain, not a drop of effort you are going through is in vain. It's accumulating something precious. Essentially, you remain the same, but the experience of that essential reality keeps on unfolding and there's no limit to it. Now, the being projects into this world, and somehow, at a certain time, I think humans were not always like this. But at the same time, some very destructive energy came in and created a lot of trouble. And that total forgetfulness happens when one is born, and then is being influenced by a lot of negativity. Your being knew before, it's going into that, but it's a possibility to learn to grow enormously within short time. But there is always the possibility to turn the attention back instead of being identified with that whole story, and then suffering stops. But you don't go in vain through a life story. Everybody who comes into this world goes out of this world richer. Just because of taking the trouble day after day after day, living in this somewhat strange condition of a consciousness being identified with a physical body, with a piece of meat, for heaven's sake. Suffering all the consequences, all the limitations that come along. It's a very powerful situation to really unfold, to grow. But as long as we are unconsciously going through it, it's a drag. It's a painful business, and it's very slow. But every moment there is that possibility that we wake up, that we learn to bring the attention back to that which makes the experience possible. Learning to be detached from that personality, becoming aware it's just a role I'm playing momentarily. It's not what I am. And then the suffering stops. And then the life becomes what it is meant to be. Playful, joyous journey through this crazy world. Getting richer for the experience with every moment. And the process of unfolding is manifold if we go through it consciously. But as long as we refuse to take that wake-up call, invariably we are going to suffer again. Like now, right, it's a hard situation for the poor kids. They are victims of the situation, and they have to somehow stick it out, go through, but once the awareness grows, there comes more and more always the possibility, okay, I have the possibility not to repeat the same stories. And that very fact that that possibility is there is a great chance. That's why a being is still coming into this world knowing what kind of a mess it is. We are not forced to just repeat the same patterns over and over and over. But if one refuses to have a look at oneself and see what's going on, then for most of the people the patterns are already established very early in life, in childhood, in youth, maybe in the 20s, but usually before that, and after that life is just a continuous repetition of the same patterns over and over. But it need not be like this. There is always the chance, and have a good look and see, no, look what I'm doing, look how I'm hurting myself all the time, and then learn not to do that anymore. That's what we are here for. Having those confrontations and waking up from that daze, from that dream, from that identification, thinking I'm this role, this person. It's just a story. I'm playing a story in the theater. It's not what I am. When I say suffering, then I mean that mental anguish that we are creating. We have all kinds of ideas how things should be, and just most of the time it's not quite fitting, and then there we are in full resistance. I don't want, it shouldn't be like this, why me again? It's always happening to me. And that mental anguish that we are creating, it's what I'm calling suffering. As long as you have a body, it's inevitable, sometimes it's hurting. But if you're not resisting, then even physical pain is not that much of a big deal. Okay, it comes, you deal with it, it goes. But if there comes physical pain and we are there in that full resistance, emotionally, mentally, no, shouldn't be, then that what wouldn't be such a big deal becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and there we suffer. If people behave the way we don't want, and we are so fixed they shouldn't behave like this, then that resistance makes that situation bigger and bigger and bigger, and that mental anguish we are creating, that is what I'm calling suffering. And that we need not do anymore. And then life is as it is. Physically, sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes it's not pleasant. Sometimes the body hurts, you deal with it, and hopefully the hurt goes. But you don't suffer. We don't have to repeat the patterns that we have learned, but as long as we are refusing to have an honest good look at ourselves, it's inevitable. And then the painful dragging out a life story like that, always getting again and again in the same situation, creating the same pains, is also not in vain, because that very intensity it creates is accumulating something precious that is not lost when one gets out of this story. Yes?
What to do when you feel guilty about something?
When you
feel guilty about something and you cannot pardon yourself.
You cannot pardon yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
What to do?
What to do? All right. You let the memory come that makes you feel guilty. For it's always connected to a story. And think, oh, I did wrong. And then just redirect the attention from the mental mill that says it was wrong, I'm bad, it was no good, why did I do like this? You just redirect your attention and bring it to your experience right now and see what the emotions that come along with that memory, what they are doing to your experience right now. Watch your body, what it is doing. Watch yourself energetically, what it is doing, what the memory is doing, what the guilt is doing. See how you're creating tensions in your expression, in your psychophysical manifestation, and then you consciously learn to relax. Even if you cannot totally relax, instead of maintaining the story and say, oh, it was no good, you just see what it is doing to you right now. Don't get lost in the past, in the story that has happened and regretting it. Okay, it may come, the regret, the guilt, but then bring the attention to the present and see what it is doing and learn to relax. And every time you do so, that intensity that is still locked in the situation is getting less. But on the other hand, if we bring up the memory and the guilt comes, and I start again to tell myself, well, it was really wrong, and it was so bad for myself, then you keep it alive and actually you make it even stronger. You don't help yourself, you don't help the persons that were involved by keeping up that. You're just hurting yourself. So, at least intellectually you can convince yourself about that, and then you, instead of being locked in the emotions, in the energies that come with the memory, with the feeling of guilt, then watch what it is doing, watch the tensions, and consciously start to relax. Start on the easiest level. Relax your legs and feet, relax your shoulders. The whole body starts to relax. And if you relax your body, then energetically you start to relax more. And if you relax physically and energetically, then you start to relax more emotionally and intellectually. And each time that comes up and you treat it like this, that intensity that is still locked into the memory is diminishing. When it comes up, you do like this, and then suddenly it goes and you feel so relieved. And you may think, okay, now it's gone. But if it's a strong habit, maybe the next day same thing comes back. And there you don't think, oh, it doesn't work, then you treat it again in the same way. Don't try to push it away, don't fight with it, say, okay, let's come, let the memory come. Feel bad about it, okay. Feel guilty about it, but then look what it is doing to your experience now and learn to relax. And each time you do that, it's getting weaker, and eventually the guilt is gone and it's just a memory.
Is it possible mentally to ask a person for whom you feel guilty to pardon?
To pardon?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. If you feel that there is a necessity to apologize, by all means go and apologize. And the person may or may not pardon you.
But if the person is not present anymore?
If the person already gone, then you make contact with the memory of that person and you ask for, you apologize to that memory.
Is it efficient?
No. But it's a good start. And then, if the memory has been hanging on to you and creating the same troubles again, that habit is not simply letting go because you apologize. But that's already a good setup for dealing with it. And then, if you feel that guilt is still there, nagging, then don't fight with it. Don't try to control it. Don't try to suppress it again in the subconscious. Then, okay, open up, let it come, feel guilty, consciously, and see, but then observe at the same time. See what it is doing right now to you, to your experience, to your manifestation, and learn to relax. And gradually definitely it's weakening and eventually it's gone. The memory is still there, the trouble goes.